What if the pain you keep asking God to remove is not proof that He has abandoned you, but part of the process that is preparing you for something you cannot yet see? There are seasons when you pray, try to do what is right, walk away from old habits, and genuinely seek God, yet instead of life becoming easier, everything seems to become heavier. People change towards you. Relationships become distant. Doors suddenly close. You watch others move forward while your own path seems filled with resistance. And eventually a frightening question enters your mind. If I am trying to follow God, why does my life hurt this much? But perhaps you have been looking at the pain from the wrong direction. Because throughout Scripture, some of the people given the greatest responsibilities first passed through rejection, loneliness, waiting, surrender, and uncertainty. Joseph received a dream before entering the pit. David was anointed before being forced into the wilderness. Moses was called before confronting Pharaoh. So the difficult season did not automatically mean the calling had disappeared. Sometimes it became the place where character was prepared to carry it. And that brings us to one of the deepest pains, rejection. It often begins quietly. Someone who used to call you stops calling. Friends who once understood you suddenly seem uncomfortable around you. Perhaps relatives question the direction your life is taking, or people who celebrated the old version of you become strangely distant when your priorities change. At first, you search for an explanation. You replay conversations in your mind. You wonder whether you offended someone. And certainly, when we have done something wrong, humility demands that we admit it. But sometimes, relationships change simply because you are changing. The habits that once connected you no longer satisfy you. The conversations you once enjoyed begin feeling empty. The direction you are taking no longer matches theirs. And suddenly you discover something painful. Not everyone who was comfortable with who you were will understand who you are becoming. This rejection can tempt you to chase people who are walking away. You explain yourself again and again because you desperately want them to understand your heart. You shrink your convictions because you do not want to appear different. You consider returning to an older version of yourself simply because that version received more acceptance. But here is the test hidden inside rejection. Will you sacrifice your growth to recover somebody's approval? Because if your identity depends entirely on being accepted, rejection will control every decision you make. You will follow whatever path receives applause instead of developing the courage to follow what you genuinely believe is right. Jesus himself experienced misunderstanding and rejection. Therefore, rejection alone cannot prove that someone is wrong, just as popularity cannot prove that someone is right. The deeper question is what rejection produces inside you. Does it create bitterness, superiority, and resentment, or does it teach you to stop making human approval the foundation of your identity? Because when rejection is handled with humility, it can teach you something acceptance rarely teaches. You can love people without needing them to validate every part of your journey, but rejection carries another hidden wound. When someone leaves, you are often grieving more than the relationship itself. You are grieving the future you imagined with that person. You thought they would still be there years from now. You imagined them celebrating your victories, supporting your calling, perhaps walking beside you through the next chapter. Then suddenly, that imagined future disappears. This is why certain goodbyes hurt far beyond the moment in which they happen. You are not simply losing what existed yesterday. You are releasing what you believed would exist tomorrow. Yet something unexpected happens when the voices around you begin fading. In the silence, you start discovering which voice you depended on most. When encouragement disappears, you discover whether your convictions can survive without applause. When people cannot give you certainty, prayer becomes more than routine. And slowly, rejection leads you into the second deep pain, loneliness. This is not simply being physically alone. You can experience it in a crowded room. You can sit beside people who genuinely love you and still feel that nobody understands the battle happening inside. There are thoughts you struggle to explain, questions you hesitate to ask, and dreams you keep hidden because previous attempts to share them ended with confused looks. So you begin editing yourself. You reveal the safe 10% while keeping the deeper 90% inside. Outwardly you smile and say, everything is fine. But inwardly you are carrying a world nobody else can see. Jesus faced a powerful form of this loneliness in Gethsemane. His disciples were nearby, yet they could not carry what he was carrying. He asked them to watch with him, but they fell asleep. And that reveals an uncomfortable truth. People can sincerely love you while still being unable to understand every part of your journey. But loneliness contains both a danger and a gift. The danger is believing that being misunderstood automatically makes you spiritually superior. It does not. Sometimes we need correction. Sometimes we need community. Sometimes the problem is not everyone else. But the gift of loneliness is that it exposes the limits of human companionship. Even the best friend cannot become God for you. Even the most loving family cannot answer every question in your soul. And when you finally understand that, solitude can become a doorway into deeper dependence on God. Yet just when you think rejection and loneliness are the hardest pains you will face, another battle begins. One you cannot escape by changing friends, leaving a room, or closing a door. Because the next opponent is waiting inside you. It is the conflict between the person you know you are called to become and the impulses, fears, weaknesses, and desires that keep pulling you backward. And this third pain is where the journey becomes far more personal. And this third pain is the battle within yourself. You love God, but you still wrestle with weakness. You want discipline, but distraction appears. You want to forgive, yet certain memories still hurt. You decide to pray, but your mind wanders. You promise yourself that this time you will be stronger, and then an old temptation returns at exactly the wrong moment. This can become one of the most confusing experiences of faith, because you begin asking, if I truly want to follow God, why am I still fighting myself? But the presence of a struggle does not automatically mean the absence of faith. Paul described this inner conflict when he spoke about wanting to do good while confronting another pull within himself. The painful truth is that transformation is often a process, and sometimes becoming more spiritually sensitive means noticing battles you previously ignored. Light does not create the dust in a room. It simply reveals what darkness allowed you to overlook. And because you can now see more clearly, you become aware not only of actions, but motives. You may do something good and suddenly realize that part of you wanted recognition for it. You may remain silent during an argument while discovering that anger is still raging inside. You may appear strong to everyone around you while privately confronting fear. This realization can humble you because eventually you discover that you cannot transform yourself through willpower alone. But that discovery is not an invitation to surrender to weakness. It is an invitation to depend more deeply on grace. You confess, learn, make things right where necessary, rise again, and continue. The goal is not pretending that you never struggle. The goal is refusing to let the struggle become your identity. Then comes the fourth pain. And this one can cost you something you genuinely love. Renunciation. Some things are easy to leave because you already know they are harming you. But surrender becomes far more painful when what you must release appears good. Perhaps it is a relationship you desperately wanted to keep, an opportunity that looked perfect, a comfortable environment, a career plan, or simply the picture you created of how your future was supposed to unfold. Nothing about it necessarily looks evil, yet something inside tells you that holding on to it is preventing you from moving forward. This is why surrender hurts. Abraham had to leave what was familiar without seeing the entire road ahead. Moses walked away from privilege. The disciples left familiar livelihoods to follow Jesus. Again and again, movement required release. But when you are the one releasing something, you rarely see the whole purpose immediately. You only feel the empty space it leaves behind. You ask why something that seemed like a blessing could not remain. And sometimes there is no immediate explanation. You simply learn that faith occasionally requires open hands before you know what those hands will eventually receive. But there is an even deeper surrender than releasing possessions, opportunities, or relationships. It is releasing your demand to control the timetable. And that leads into the fifth pain, waiting. This is where days become months, months become years, and something you once felt certain about seems no closer than when you began. You pray, but nothing appears to change. You knock, but the door remains closed. Meanwhile, other people seem to receive quickly what you have been waiting years to see. Comparison whispers that you have been forgotten. Joseph knew something about this kind of waiting. His dreams came long before their fulfillment. David was anointed long before he sat securely on the throne. Abraham received a promise and then discovered that a promise can test patience precisely because fulfillment does not always arrive on our preferred schedule. And this is where waiting becomes dangerous, because when God seems slow, we become tempted to manufacture what we believe He promised. We force doors. We rush relationships. We make decisions from panic because uncertainty feels unbearable. But waiting can expose whether we desire God's will or simply desire God to approve our timetable. Patience is easy when you know exactly when the answer is coming. Real patience begins when you do not. Then comes the sixth pain. Silence. Waiting is difficult when nothing happens, but silence becomes even harder when you cannot sense an explanation. There are seasons when prayer once felt alive and suddenly feels dry. You read scripture, but do not experience the same emotion. You ask for direction and hear nothing obvious. And slowly the frightening question appears, God, where are you? Yet silence is not necessarily absence. A teacher can remain quiet during a test without leaving the room. There are moments when faith must grow beyond feelings. Because if you only trust God when you feel something powerful, your confidence will rise and fall with your emotions. Silence forces you to decide whether you will remain faithful when there is no dramatic confirmation. And finally comes the seventh pain, the one that seems to gather all the others together, being misunderstood. People may see your decisions, but not the prayers behind them. They see what you surrendered, but not why surrender became necessary. They see you waiting, but do not understand what you believe you are waiting for. Some may call you foolish. Others may think you have changed too much, and the temptation will be to explain yourself endlessly until everybody approves. But eventually you learn that not every person needs to understand every chapter of your life. You still remain humble. You still listen to wise correction. You still examine your motives. But you stop handing strangers, critics, and temporary relationships the authority to define your identity. And now look at what these seven pains can produce when they are handled with faith instead of bitterness. Rejection can loosen your dependence on approval. Loneliness can deepen your relationship with God. Internal conflict can teach dependence on grace. Renunciation can teach surrender. Waiting can develop patience. Silence can strengthen faith beyond emotion. And being misunderstood can teach you to walk with conviction while remaining humble. So perhaps the question is no longer simply, why am I going through this? Perhaps the better question is, what can God form in me through this that comfort never could? Your tears are not a badge proving that you are better or more chosen than someone else. Pain itself does not make anyone spiritually superior, but suffering placed in God's hands can become a classroom. What wounded you can teach you compassion. What made you wait can teach you patience. What left you lonely can make you notice the lonely person nobody else sees. And one day, someone may sit across from you carrying the same kind of pain you once thought would destroy you. And instead of giving them empty words, you will be able to look at them with understanding and say, keep going. This season does not have to be the end of your story. So if you are walking through rejection, loneliness, inner battles, surrender, waiting, silence, or misunderstanding today, do not build your identity around the pain. Let it push you deeper into wisdom, humility, prayer, and perseverance. Keep examining your heart. Keep choosing what is right. Keep getting back up when you fall. Because you may not understand the entire process while you are inside it, but sometimes the meaning becomes visible only after you have walked through the fire. And perhaps one day you will look back at the doors that closed, the people who left, the prayers that seemed unanswered, and the years that appeared wasted, and finally understand that the season you desperately wanted to escape was also teaching you how to survive, how to surrender, and above all, how to be patient. The pain was never meant to become your destination. Keep walking,